In this lesson, we are going to be identifying different graphs and deciding what type of function they would be, if they're even a function. I should say what type of equation maybe. So you'll notice that you have the choices of linear, quadratic, cubic, rational, square root, absolute value, and greatest integer. So we're going to kind of run through these and label them as best we can. I'm going to do the first 9 with you, and then I'm going to have you do the next 9 for tomorrow. So as we go through, look on your front page and your notes. So think of a linear function. Which graphs there look like a linear function on this first page 1 through 9? Hopefully you recognize that number 5 is a linear function. So when I go to 5, there's my straight line, so we would call this one linear. And that's the only straight line I have in this whole page. So next we're going to look for quadratic functions. Quadratic functions are graphed as what? Parabolas. So below the word linear in your notes, you should write straight line. Below the word quadratic, you should write parabola, or something like that. So which of my first 9 problems are a parabola? Well, we've got number 1. There's an example of a quadratic. And that's a parabola going up. And then we also have number 6. There's another quadratic. Now, the next thing we could look at is cubic functions. So are there any on here that you think are cubic functions? So we studied that in chapter 7. And hopefully you recognize there's one that's cubic, and that one is number 2. If you look at number 2, see how it crosses the axis 3 times? And the arrows are going in opposite directions. We don't have a choice that says like 5 roots or something, so we're assuming this is cubic based on what we've learned so far. So there's an example of a cubic function. The next one is a rational function, which is what we've been studying. Those are graphs that have asymptotes or holes in them, very obvious holes that you can see drawn in the graph. So take a look, and you will see that number 3 is a rational function. If you were looking for your asymptotes, they occur right here at -1 and at 0. And then we have one more rational function. If you look through graphs 1 through 9, which occurs at number 8. Number 8, there we go, there is rational as well. So there are my choices for rational. A square root function is one I think you might not remember, but that would be an example of half of a sideways parabola. That's what a square root function looks like. It's just half of a sideways parabola. So looking at what we have left on this page, hopefully you can identify number 4 as our square root function. The last 2 are absolute value and greatest integer. So we have, the only ones we have left are 7 and 9. Number 7 is one we literally did one problem of this. And this could be called a step function or a greatest integer function. And so when you see those steps, that's the greatest integer one. Which means number 9 is our absolute value. And if you remember, absolute value equations make the v. So the one I think you might forget is the greatest integer function, but when you narrow down all the rest, that's the only one that's kind of by itself. So then you can hopefully figure that out. I would like you guys right now to pause the video and do 10 through 18 on your notes. So pause it, go through, label those really quick. You probably take you 2 minutes, and then you can check your answers with me. Number 10, it is a straight line, horizontal even, right? So this is a linear function. If they gave us the choice of a constant function, this is what we would call this one, but that wasn't a choice given to us, so we call it linear. Number 11 is a parabola, so we'll say quadratic. Number 12, this is a cubic function. We only have one real 0, so that means there's 2 imaginary roots, but our arrows go in opposite directions, so that's our only way of identifying that. So cubic function. Number 13 is that V graph again. So there's an absolute value. Number 14, arrows in opposite directions. 3 real zeros, look at that. So we're saying cubic. Number 15, there's our step function again, so we'll say greatest integer. Number 16, it looks like we have a quadratic, right, because of that parabola. But remember, there's more on there. Look at those asymptotes. So this is an example of a rational function. Number 17 is quick and easy linear. Now, the one thing I'm going to tell you is, what if they would have put a hole in there? If they put a hole in there, what would we call it? Rational. So you got to be on the lookout for that. And then 18, our last one, looks like half of a sideways parabola, which is a square root function. So hopefully you can identify. Our goal is that you can look at a graph and tell me something about the graph, what type of function it would be for, linear, quadratic, cubic, rational, absolute value, any of those, or be able to look at the equation, which we'll do in our next video.